Hello everyone and welcome back to the Damage Counter YouTube channel. Bringing you another video here today. This time we're going to be talking about my 2023 season in competitive Pokemon. This is the first season where I've gone from the beginning of the season and played in events consistently all the way through to the end of the season. And so I wanted to just make a quick video recapping my season. I realize I am totally ripping off OmniPoke here. I got the idea from them. Basically stole the format thanks to Google Sheets here. So shameless ripoff, but I thought it was cool and I wanted to share what happened with me this season. So to start things off, here's a list of all of the regionals in NA that I went to. I know it's a bit congested. There's a lot of stuff going on in NA, so bear with me here. But all of the regionals you see in the green boxes are all the ones I went to. And of course the X's are all ones that I didn't go to. So ended up playing at Baltimore, Peoria, Arlington, Orlando, Knoxville, Milwaukee, and then finally in Columbus at the North American International Championships. For a lot of the regionals I didn't go to, it's either I just didn't have enough money to attend the regionals at the time, or they were just so far away or in other countries that I just couldn't get to for one reason or another. So still though, out of all these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, not bad. 7 regionals, well, 6 regionals and 1 IC for one season, definitely not bad at all. So we'll start things off with the first regional of the season. This was Baltimore Regionals. This was done in the Sword and Shield 2 Pokemon Go format, same format as the World Championships, just a couple weeks prior. And if you're following the podcast, or if you follow me on Twitter, or really have even just been on this YouTube channel for a while, you'll know that I've played a lot of Sylveon Arceus. It's my favorite archetype still to this day. And, coming off of NAIC, Worlds format basically being in the same format, just with the addition of Pokemon Go, and then Baltimore being very soon after the World Championships in the same format, I decided that I would play Sylveon Arceus to Baltimore, especially after Tai Nguyen I think he got a top 16 finish in the London Open, with a build very similar to this. So I definitely felt like the list was strong. Of course, this is back before any of the Lost Zone cards, so Arceus was just a really strong card. Flying Pikachu was the go-to counter for Regis and Palkia. And just, taking the Arceus Pikachu core and then just throwing in a Rapid Strike package in there definitely made for a unique deck, and one that I actually felt was pretty strong for the entire format, in all honesty. Your only bad matchup really is Mew. But otherwise, you handle pretty much every other matchup no problem, in my opinion, as long as you don't brick, your classic Arceus pile stuff. And I felt like there was going to be a lot of Arceus, coming off of the World Championships. Arceus Flying Pikachu had such a dominating performance. And of course, there was the top 16 Arceus Aggron that came out of nowhere and stuff like that, right? And I was hoping, and I was fairly confident that Mew VMAX was going to fall off for this event. As you can see by the top 8, where there were 3 of them, I could not have been further from the truth. As the DTE Mew had grown far more popular than I had expected from the World Championships. I personally had tested it before Baltimore, and I was not a fan, so I didn't think many people were going to pick it up, but I was definitely very wrong about that. So as you can see, went 5-4 at the time. This was my best regional finish, starting things off with a no-show, which was really funny. But generally speaking, I think it was basically correct with my meta predictions. Arceus was everywhere. I mean, I played against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if you count the Arceus V-Star guest appearance in the Darkrai deck, round 2. So lots of Arceus. So Urshifu definitely got his workout in for this event. Definitely came in handy. And of course, the Flying Pikachu mirrors. I think just Urshifu in general is just really good just because of all the Arceus. Because it's okay, cool. There's going to be a lot of Arceus. So I can just put Urshifu in my Arceus deck, and then I can punish them, right? So yeah, it was pretty interesting. And of course, you had the the Sylveon VMAX is your kind of general heavy hitter in the Flying Pikachu to round out the list and be a good basic blocker. Pretty good stuff all around. I did play against two Mew decks that day, and I think they were both Fusion Mew. I didn't write it down in my Twitter thread back when I posted this, so but I'm pretty sure they were Fusion variants instead of the Double Turbo variants. But either way, overall, pretty good regional. Like I said, I got 5-4, which at the time was my best regional finish. It was a pretty good start to the season. No points, no day two, nothing like that, but felt like it was a good start. Despite the popularity of Arceus, there were none in top 8. Like, I felt like there was just Arceus everywhere. And maybe it was just like a mid to low table type thing, because I had a pretty poor start, all things considered. Because I started 2-0 from the no-show and the round 2 win, but then it kind of went downhill like really fast with like back-to-back losses. So I fell pretty quick, so maybe it was just a mid to bottom tables thing. But either way, considering that this is my first like season going full-time competitive, not full-time, but like trying to compete throughout the entire season, I feel like it was a pretty alright start and a pretty unique deck. Second verse, same as the first. The next regionals we went to was Peoria regionals. Now, a little bit of backstory for you on this. I was traveling a lot at the time, so I went to Baltimore, and then the very next week I went to a Lost Origin 5K, and then the very next week I went to Peoria, and then the very next week after that I went to go visit my parents, who live out of state. So I did not have a lot of time to do any Lost Origin testing. I was taking my testing for Baltimore pretty seriously and was testing way up until like the night before the event. So because of that, I did not get any testing in with Lost Origin, and I really wasn't sure how Sylveon Arceus felt for the format, how Arceus Flying Pikachu felt, or really just Arceus in general. Just wasn't really sure like where Arceus stood in a format with Giratina V-Star and Star Requiem, right? Like, it was just one of those things. I was like, man, I really don't know what Arceus does in this format. It was still, because this was like the weekend that Lost Origin became legal, so it was still kind of up in the air on what like the best way to build Arceus in this format. So my thought process was, I was like, okay, well, I'm doing all this traveling. I have 0 time to test, so let me just make upgrades to my existing Arceus Sylveon list, and then just try to rely on some legacy skill, as at this point I had been playing Sylveon VMAX for, no joke, a year straight at this point. So I figured I would just ride off of player skill and deck familiarity and just try to make the most of it. A few differences between the Baltimore list and the Peoria list. I decided to go with a heavier Sylveon VMAX line as a way to potentially get some early pressure on like basic Giratina V, basic Kyurem V. Try to, if you get to go first, basically try to hit them before they evolve to kind of get you that early head start. And that did work in a few games. Definitely helped me out in that game against Kyurem that you see in round 1. But this was just a weird tournament. As you can see, I went 3-3-3, 3 ties to 3 wins to 3 losses, like all at the same time. So it was like a whirlwind. This was kind of a weird time. I think a lot of the ties, and if you were at Peoria, you know this, there were so many ties. Like, the Lost engine was so new for a lot of people. So you had people playing the Inteleon engine, which is already kind of slow in and of itself, like a lot of decision making there. And then the Lost engine comes into the game. And I think a lot of people were kind of still trying to get their bearings with it. So there were like so many ties in the early rounds of Peoria. It was very funny. But overall, it was a pretty terrible deck choice for the event. I kind of knew that going in, because I remember reading some of the Lost Origin translations driving to NAIC 2022, and I was like, oh my god, when that set comes out, like, Sylveon Arceus just isn't going to cut it. And I knew that going into this event, but like I said, I just didn't have the time to test. I didn't have the time to try out any of the new archetypes. I was pressed for time, didn't have really a solid game plan, so this was the best I had. So a pretty terrible meta call, just all things considered. But I figured I'd give it a try. Like I said, I didn't have time to do anything, so I was like, you know what? I know this is bad, and for future regionals, I'll look into a different archetype for once, because again, I'd been playing this for a year straight at this point, and it was starting to get power crept out of the format. But I gave it one last ride. Nearly made it to day 2 with the 504. It almost happened. Round 7, the dream died, but it is what it is at the end of the day. For a deck that was not particularly well favored into Peoria's metagame, I guess you could do worse, right? I mean, I definitely made the most of it. The nice thing was having the Drapion to kind of help with the Mew matchup. Like, Sylveon always struggled with Mew, but, now you had Mew covered, and then you had that problematic matchup replaced by Giratina V-Star, which certainly did not bode well for the deck at all. I did play against a few of those, managed to squeeze out a tie for one in round 3, most likely thanks to Urshifu. I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details. Peoria was a while ago, please forgive me. But absolutely got wrecked by one in round 9, so it is what it is. Flying Pikachu was absolutely broken, I'll say that much, and I think just Flying Pikachu, just in general throughout this entire season, is probably one of the most broken cards, even in the Silver Tempest format and beyond. I think Flying Pikachu straight up is just one of the most broken cards for this entire season, and it absolutely carried its weight. I mean, I didn't break a sweat against that Sablezard in round 5, right? Because you just get the Flying Pikachu active and you just say Max Balloon a bunch of times. Absolutely hilarious. But either way, things did not go particularly well for me here. And if you look at the top 8, again, no Arceus, no Sylveon, no Rapid Strike, no nothing. And again, it was like I said, it was at a time where it was just like, I really don't think Arceus can cut it. Obviously, we saw that kind of changed as we saw Arceus Flying Pikachu and Arceus Goodra start to do well, especially at Salt Lake City. Those were the top 2 decks at that event, so it wasn't the end of the road for Arceus, not by a long shot, but things were looking a little bit dire. But this is the only regional I was able to make it to in the Lost Origin format, so we jump straight into the Silver Tempest format with Arlington Regionals. Now trying to step away from the archetype that I have played for so long, trying to play things that are a little bit more meta, try to get, a little bit more, I guess, unoriginal, I guess, with my deck choices, for lack of a better term. So we get to Arlington Regionals. This was a week after the Toronto Regionals, where Piper Lapine had won with a Mewtwo control, pretty similar to the build I have here at Arlington. And this is, once again, another pretty abysmal meta call. For about 2 or 3 months before Arlington Regionals, I had actually been hardcore testing like Zoroark Box, because I felt like Zoroark Box was one of the best decks in the format. Like, the matchup spread for Zoroark Box just felt so good, and I was like, there's no way this isn't like one of the best contenders. And then I played against Lost Zone Box, and it's like, I can't play this. There's no way that I can play Zoroark Box in a format where Lost Zone Box will always be the second most played deck, right? So I kind of hit that realization a little bit close to Arlington, so I had to, like, the panic switch off of Zoroark Box into Mewtwo Control, because it was really the only other deck in the format the only other meta deck in the format that I was, like, somewhat familiar with how to play and also kind of enjoyed at the same time. So a week before the event, I was like, you know what? I know how to play this from the Astral Radiance metagame. I can learn the new build pretty quickly. Let's just rock. So I took the basis of Piper's list, made a few changes here and there, most notably added in the Ice Cube and Wash Water Energy, just because Mewtwo had won Toronto regionals just a week prior. We were expecting a lot of Lost Box for this event, and especially teched with Drapion, just in case somebody showed up with Mewtwo. So the idea was to, against a Lost Zone deck that isn't playing Drapion, then you can just kind of do the normal Mewtwo game plan, and you're just like, you're chilling, like whatever, it doesn't really matter. Because they're not really ever going to be able to one-shot the Mewtwo, right? So you can just play the deck normally, but I was expecting a lot of Lost Box decks with Drapion for this event, just because I feel like, they had their eyes on Mewtwo v Union again. And I believe, Mew is always a consideration as well, right? So the idea was to basically put in the Ice Cube Wash Water package, to kind of cover for that, which typically Mewtwo doesn't need for the Lost Box or Reggie's matchups. Like, Mewtwo in and of itself just kind of wins those matchups on its own. But when they're teched with Drapion, the Lost Zone decks have an out to Mewtwo. So the idea was essentially to put in the Ice Cube Wash Water package. That way you had that alternate win condition against Lost Zone decks. That way you didn't have to worry about a Drapion, murking you at the end of the game and losing the game for you. As you can see, I only played against one Lost Box that event, and I have to apologize again. Arlington was so long ago, I don't remember what variation of Lost Box that was, and I did not specify it on my Twitter post. But as you can see, it didn't really work out for me. We did play against the Lugia Gauntlet, but, starting out with a tie against Arceus Duraludon and then losing to a Lugia that was teched with Espeon, it kind of put me off to a bad start with a tie, a loss, and a tie. Managed to kind of get there against some other Lugia players who I felt like probably didn't test the control matchup, but things were just not going well for me. Because again, I think just Mewtwo was just a horrible meta call. It had won the week before. It was on people's radars. People knew about it, and I don't know. It was just kind of just not smart, generally speaking, to play a deck that won a regional, just a week prior usually. And it's because of this event that, like, okay, I'll look at results and be like, what won the last tournament? Okay, cool. I'm not going to play that deck. Generally not a good idea. So not a great meta call, but also another thing is that, like, I just kind of underestimated, like, the kind of mental energy it takes to play control at a regional, as I had never done that before. So by the time I got through round 9, my brain was absolutely fried, and I was just tired and exhausted. I was like, I was not as ready for that as I thought I was going to be. And again, kind of going back to just how bad a meta call that was. Again, no Mewtwo in the top 8. There was one Mewtwo control that made day 2, but they did not do particularly well, if I remember correctly. So just overall, there were too many people that were aware of this, too many people that were trying to get around this. And just overall not a great shout for the event. So I ended up going 2-3-4 at the time. My worst regional finish to date, 649th place. And you're going to have these bad meta calls every now and again. This kind of stuff happens. It just is what it is. Unfortunately, does not get much better for me here, because next we have Orlando regionals. Leading up to Orlando, I'd played in a lot of online tournaments, and I had come across Arceus Tapu Koko. That was what I was originally planning on playing for this event. And I kind of wish I had, because me and my friends, we got Radiant Eternatus pilled. We tested the deck with Radiant Eternatus and the Flying Pikachu, even have the spicy tech of the Rapid Strike Urshifu. We had tested the list, and for the first several games, the list was just firing on all cylinders. You had the Lost Zone engine, which is really consistent. The Duraludons were coming out. They were bodying the Lugias. They were just generally being annoying to deal with without having to deal with the Pokemon Vs being vulnerable or being able to be brought back with Echoing Horn, stuff like that. The list was testing really well for us, so a lot of us decided to play it for the event. And slowly, as we got closer and closer to Orlando Regionals, the testing group kind of fell off the deck one by one. Some of them even a night before the event, which was very funny. But me and friend of the show, Jake Riggs, we stuck with it. Jake had a much better finish than I did. As you can see, I went 252, which is my worst regional finish to date. And what else can I say other than the fact that this deck is just inherently really bad? There are probably better ways to build this that probably would have been more successful. We were going full in on the Radiant Eternatus strategy, no basics, no nothing. We were like, okay, it's Radiant Eternatus or bust. Your only basic is the Comfey, the Etern, and the Oranguru. That's it. And the rest of it is, flipping through with the Lost Zone engine, trying to find your quick balls so you can get the Radiant Eternatus and stuff like that. And really and truly, there were just way too many problems with this list. There were the chances that you could draw into your VMAXs. There was a chance that you had to Lost Zone them. You only had the one energy recycler. You had to basically get turn 1 E-turn, otherwise you were screwed. And then you had to get turn 2 Mirage Gate, otherwise you weren't really doing anything. So overall, the list just had way too much going on and not enough draw power to get it where it needed to be. The list at the end of the day was really fun. If I could say anything, when the deck worked, it was one of the most fun decks I had played that format, but unfortunately, it working did not happen very often. And you can see just by looking at some of the rounds I had, a loss to Vikavolt, item lock sucks for a deck like this. Tide Fusion Mew, I actually could have won that game, but I made a misplay in time, and it threw away the whole game for me, so I had to leave with a tie. Got paired into Shadow Rider, which is a pretty terrible matchup. You are reading that right, that is Dialga Blastoise, as in Pokemon Go Blastoise. The deck was just too slow that, Pokemon Go Blastoise was able to get in there and give my opponent the Chrono Star, right? So, it is what it is, I got a little too hyped up on the new cards. Me and the testing group felt like Crown Zenith was going to be a big change to the format, and it really wasn't at the time. It wasn't until OCIC that some of those cards finally kind of shook up the metagame a little bit, but yeah, otherwise this was pretty terrible, all things considered. We don't talk about Orlando Regionals. Finally, though, we get to our last regional in the Crown Zenith format. This was Knoxville Regionals. One that I was very much looking forward to, as it was the less strenuous for me as far as travel goes. But also, I had a lot of personal stuff going on around this time, so my testing was a little bit limited, and my enthusiasm for the format at this point, we were nearly 6 months into the same format, and just, it was not getting any better. So my enthusiasm was a little bit low. So once again, for this event, I was testing Arceus Tapu Koko, and then just kind of fell off of it. I got a little impulsive. I lost the game against Lugia in a pretty dramatic fashion, and I was just like, I for the life of me cannot play an Arceus deck in this format. And that's when my coach Ian Robb, he said, hey, I feel like Flying Pikachu is really good for this weekend. I'm thinking about playing Control. Here's my list. Maybe this is what you need to play. I tested it out, and I was like, okay, well, I know I like Yveltal Control. I played it a little bit after Standard debuted it at LAIC. I love Flying Pikachu. It's just one of my favorite cards, right? I agree. I think Flying Pikachu was a really good call for this weekend in particular, despite the fact that obviously you don't see it here in the top cut, but it just felt really strong. We knew Lost Box, again, was just going to remain popular. Lugia was going to remain popular. Especially after Lost Zone winning OCIC a week or two before Knoxville. It was very likely that a lot of people were going to try to pick up the whole Sky Seal Stone technology and maybe try to run with it. So Flying Pikachu felt like a good call, and just putting it in Control. I do genuinely feel like the Flying Pikachu variant of Yveltal Control is probably has one of the best matchup spreads in the entire format, I think. A little underrated. A lot of people don't really like to play Control, just, because it's Control, but also because Control can be difficult to play sometimes. But either way, showed up to Knoxville Regionals, went 4-4-1. Overall, I feel like I did okay. This is one of those things where, again, I just picked the deck like a week before the regional and just tried to get as much testing in as I could. And I think for picking up such a complex deck just a week before the regional and doing, relatively well, especially in comparison to my last attempt to play Control at a regional, I think the results are fairly good. My play was a bit scuffed in some games. You probably see the loss against Arceus Tapu Koko round 1, which should just be an auto win because you have Miltank. And that's basically what it was. I got my board to lone Miltank, but then I kind of I thought a little too hard about a situation. I was like, well, I could Bruno to keep myself from decking out, and I was like, or I can just do an Eldegoss loop with Bird Keeper and I'll be fine. So I did that. I benched the Eldegoss. I played the Bird Keeper, drew my deck, and I was like, where's my double turbo energy? I was not keeping track of my resources, so I ended up losing that game to deck out, unfortunately. So it is what it is, And, again, there were just a few rounds where just my play was just not particularly great and didn't have amazing luck. Like the E-turn Wheezing round, I was actually... I had a win condition set up for that as well because Miltank with Big Parasol is impenetrable. Eternatus can't do anything about it because they only attack with Pokemon V and with Wheezing. So if you have Miltank and Big Parasol, there's literally nothing that the Eternatus deck can do to get around that. And I was down to my opponent had one prize card left. And they were I was protecting the Miltank, as much as I could. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, I need to Radiant Greninja this energy. And then hope that out of the 3 cards in deck, I pull the Big Parasol. And sure enough, the Big Parasol was on the bottom of the deck. Couldn't get it. And could not protect the Miltank from being poisoned. And, that's just kind of what wrapped it up. So I think I played all right. I think it was a good call. Things didn't quite go my way. I think I had, especially in the later rounds, had some pretty bad variants. But it was nice in the early rounds to absolutely eat all the Lost Zone decks for breakfast. Not a single one of them stood a chance. It was very funny. So really cool deck, really fun. Probably one of, if not my favorite deck from the Silver Tempest format. One of the few decks that was genuinely extremely fun to play. No matter if you were playing against Lugia, Lost Zone, didn't matter. This deck was just so much fun to play. And then between Knoxville and Rotation and the Scarlet and Violet sets, local events came back. So I went to quite a few League Cups and challenges. Didn't do particularly well at most of them, but it is what it is. It's not like I was going for points or anything. I was just trying to get some extra competition in where I could. So with the first challenge I did in Clarksville, I played Sylveon Arceus. Every time a new format comes around, especially since rotation was a factor this time, I try to give Sylveon the time of the day. It is my favorite archetype after all. And I felt like there was potential for Sylveon to be a good deck again come post-rotation, but unfortunately it just wasn't the case. Early on in the metagame, there was a lot of Giratina, which is not a great matchup. And Single Strike Lugia also was kind of problematic as well. You didn't really have a good answer for that. So unfortunately, I don't think Sylveon Arceus was able to cut it this format. Gave it a second shot, same 60, at a Bowling Green challenge. I think it was actually the next day. Managed to snag 4th place with that one, so overall not too bad. Went to a League Cup in Nashville after deciding that Sylveon probably wasn't going to be as good as I wanted it to be this format. Decided to pick up a different deck, but I was not really a fan of anything, any of the meta decks in the Scarlet and Violet format, and to be honest with you, spoiler warning, I really just didn't like the battle styles, the Scarlet and Violet format at all, to be honest. It just wasn't fun for me. And And so in my testing and trying to find a bunch of stuff, I just wasn't finding anything until Tord posted on his Twitter a Palkia Babero list. And I thought, you know what, why not? I'll give it a shot. I've never played Palkia, I've always wanted to try it. I played it, thought the deck was insane. I was like, okay, sure, a week before the League Cup, let me just play this deck I've never played. Ended up getting like 38th out of 64, so kind of middle of the road, didn't do too hot, but Palkia was pretty fun, all things considered. Hit up another League Challenge in Bowling Green, this time with Urshifu and Polion, this very interesting deck that made day 2 at EUIC, I believe piloted by Magnus Peterson, if I remember correctly. Plays the Rapid Strike Urshifu, and a heavy Empoleon V package with the Scroll of Swirls and a 1/1 Duraludon package to deal with Lugia. Very interesting deck. I think that deck actually had a really good matchup spread in the metagame to basically everything except Gardevoir, which was fine because at the time Gardevoir wasn't really seeing a lot of play. But otherwise, pretty solid deck and definitely one of my favorites from that format, especially considering that I'm really not a big fan of that format. And then finally, I had another 2 challenges in Clarksville. Managed to win one of them with Arceus Giratina. It was just a straightforward, no frills Arceus Giratina list geared for maximum consistency. Managed to pull that out pretty good. And then had another league challenge about a week or so before the NAIC, where I played Inteleon Urshifu. Was kind of using that as a way to test. That one did not go particularly well, but it was helpful nonetheless in helping me iron my list for NAIC. So yeah, a few league challenges and cups to go along there. Not quite done with the regionals. We had Milwaukee regionals. Still in the Battle Styles, the Scarlet and Violet format. And this remains my best finish to date. At this event, I played Arceus Duraludon Umbreon, and I had that sneaky Lucario V-Star tech in there, as I felt like Arceus was going to be. I felt like Arceus was going to be pretty popular for this event. I also felt like Giratina V-Star, specifically the Lost Zone variant, was actually going to be really good for Milwaukee. I felt like it was really strong positioned. If you listen to the podcast, you know I've been preaching that Lost Zone Giratina was one of the best decks for the Scarlet and Violet format. I still believe that, to be perfectly honest. So I felt like the meta was shaping up for Lost Zone Giratina to make a comeback at this event. And of course, Arceus just remaining relatively high. So I threw in the Lucario V-Star as a way to kind of handle that, because obviously the Lucario can hit opposing Arceus for weakness, as well as being able to use the same Hawlucha plus Choice Belt combo to get 280 on V-Stars, which is really nice. And it came in handy in a few spots. I used it against Goodra round 1, and against the Arceus Flying Pikachu that you see there in round 7. The Lucario was pretty handy. Unfortunately, did not get much use out of it round 2 against the Arceus Duraludon Umbreon. But it is what it is. Overall, I mean, it was a really good deck. It's pretty straightforward, all things considered. Not really, like, the Lucario is like the craziest thing about the list, but everything else is fairly standard. It was a pretty good meta call. There was a lot of Lost Box, a lot of Lugia as well, and definitely some Arceus hanging around the upper tables as well. I got to, like, the high end of the tables at around round 8. And there was just, I was sitting next to like 5 other Arceus players. I mean, there was so much Arceus at this event, especially, the upper tables in the later rounds. So good stuff. None of them really made that top 8. There was the Arceus Giratina that made 3rd, but that was really about it. But overall, I still think a pretty good meta call. I think like the Arceus Duraludon Umbreon is just an absurd deck for the Scarlet and Violet format. Like, you punish the Gardevoirs, you can hit the Gardevoir EX for weakness, you can Lost Zone their evolution lines, Lost City, and just these massive HP numbers against Lost Box is really good. This variant, or like this list specifically, being able to hit weakness against opposing Arceus is really cool. You having at least somewhat of an out to Mew with the Umbreon is also really nice, and then you basically just kind of curb stomp Lugia. Like, yeah, they have the single striker Shifu, but like most of the time you can just hit them first. Like, and it's really not that hard. Like, you have such aggressive gusting in this deck that, like, you rarely have to worry about the Urshifu. And you also have the Mean Look on the Umbreon, which you can use to, like, trap like Luminions and stuff, which I actually did end up doing. I think that's a very large reason as to why I won Game 3 in Round 6. Because my opponent literally turn 1 went, like, Ultra Ball, discard they went, like, discard Archeops Penny. And I was like, oh, cool, boss, Mean Look. And just kind of kept them there until I created a board state where, basically I could 2-hit KO everything. Or not have to 2-hit KO everything, but, like, everything was prepped and ready to be damaged. So I think everything was all good there. But yeah, this was an absurdly broken deck. A really good meta call for the weekend, I think. And, finished at 5-3-1, top 256. My first time getting points at a regional. So finally breaking that goal of top 256. Definitely made me really happy. Kind of showed that I was on the right track as a player. And was hoping to keep the momentum going as we go into the NAIC, the North America International Championships. Again, think I made a pretty good meta call for this event. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, as I did just recently upload my tournament report for the North America International Championships. So if you're interested to hear more about this, to me get a little bit more specific about my deck and about the rounds I played, definitely check out that video. But otherwise, what else can I say? It was a really strong meta call. It ended up winning the event. As you can see here, Cyrus Davis took it all home with the same archetype. Our lists are very different, but generally, I mean, yeah, it was just such a good meta call. Arceus was everywhere. Gardevoir, Lost Box, even Chien Pao made up such a large portion of the metagame, and those are all favorable matchups for Urshifu. So, pretty good meta call. Played pretty good, got that 4-3-2, so not as well as I was hoping. I was really hoping that this would kind of be my day 2 break. And I think had I been a little bit more prepared, it probably would have been. But unfortunately, just not how things went, so it is what it is. But again, if you want to hear more about my run at NAIC, definitely check out the tournament report that I uploaded yesterday, as I go more in depth with my thought process on the deck and certain things that happened in the rounds at this event. Now, I'm not going to the World Championships. Didn't earn enough CP. Not even close. I think I ended with like 55 CP. Personally, did not go particularly well in that regard. But, I figured if I were going to the World Championships, I think these are some of the decks that I would be eyeing up to play. Personally, I think at the top of my list right now is just Arceus piles. Gardevoir and Lost Zone Box are still the decks to beat going into the World Championship, I feel like. It's just a matter of what Arceus deck is best. Obviously, we know Arceus Umbreon variants are really good, either with the Duraludon or with the Flying Pikachu. Of course, Flying Pikachu is just an absurdly broken card. It's been very useful time and again. And the Sylveon's not here for my personal cope, even though that is part of why it's here. But I do think that there is genuinely a small niche for Sylveon to potentially be a good call for Worlds after the success of Inteleon Urshifu. It's a long shot, and I really don't expect it to take hold. Like, this is probably, like, bottom of the barrel. Because, like, if you're thinking of, like, Arc Umbreon Pikachu, or Arc Duraludon Umbreon, or maybe even Arceus Giratina are all probably better partners than Sylveon, but I do think since Urshifu is now something that a lot of people are having to consider now, I feel like that there is a genuine niche for an Arceus Sylveon deck at the World Championships. Again, I don't expect it to take hold because, it's great that it beats Urshifu, but, like, finding a way for it to comfortably deal with, like, Gardevoir and especially with Lugia, I think is the trick, right? But either way, I think some sort of Arceus pile just seems really strong going into the World Championships. As we saw with Michael Catron's deck, and even, honestly, even with the Arceus Duraludon Umbreon, there are still so many things that deck, that, like, Arceus decks can just cover for. It can be changed and shaped to fit the metagame, and all it takes is one of these Arc Pile players to put the right Pokemon in and have the right matchups, and they're going to win the whole thing, right? So I feel like Arceus is just really strong going into the World Championships. Also looking at Reversal Gardevoir, not your more traditional Gardevoir, but the one with the Mewtwo V-Union and the heavy Reversal package. I know a lot of people aren't really super hot on this specific variant of the archetype, but it is my personal favorite way to play Gardevoir currently. It is a little bit more volatile, a little less consistent, but and of course is also one of the most difficult decks to play in the format, but I do genuinely feel like its matchup spread is one of the best. And I think the matchups that it does struggle against, like, probably aren't going to see high amounts of play at the World Championships. And, you know, just having that plan where it's just like, go behind, attack with powerful one-prizers powered by Reversal Energy, and then close out the game with Mewtwo, Exodia style. It's an incredibly strong strategy, and a surprising number of archetypes really don't have an answer for it as long as it sets up and as long as it draws well. If those two things happen, then I think you're doing pretty good. Because like I said, I just feel like a lot of things don't have like a good game plan against it. And, you know, you could make the argument that probably Guardy just, like, this variant of Guardy probably just isn't the move because of, like, the heavy amounts of Lost City going around right now. And that's definitely a good argument to make, but I think that having the Mirage Step Curlia kind of helps you circumvent that a little bit. You'd probably need to change the list to incorporate more rare candies instead of just, like, the one or two that the Reversal Guardy lists usually play. I think you'd have to play a minimum of 3 if that's your consideration, but I do feel like the list is pretty strong for the World Championships, and I personally, as a player, like, I think Gardevoir is still, like, the traditional Gardevoir is still the deck to beat going into the World Championships, and I don't ever want to be the guy playing the deck that everybody's trying to beat. It's the deck to beat for a reason, and I get that, but I don't know. I feel like it would be exhausting playing the deck that just everybody's teched out for, you know what I mean? So I try to typically avoid that kind of stuff. And then finally, honestly, Inteleon or Shifu, I think, well, yes, it is on a lot of people's radar. Yes, it did win NAIC. Personally, I don't really think there's much that a lot of decks can do to deal with this deck, right? There's a few cute tech cards that I think maybe Gardevoir, maybe Arceus could play to try to get around it, but generally speaking, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be enough. Right, because if you think about it, Arceus decks really can't play Dunsparce because that'll get Yoga looped, and that could honestly just make the matchup worse for you, depending on the situation. Gardevoir, I mean, it doesn't particularly have many answers, at least that we like know of right now. It doesn't really have many answers to this deck. I think the only way Inteleon or Shifu ends up being a bad play for the World Championships is if Mew and or Lugia are expected to be there in high numbers. But again, it's just kind of one of those things where it's like Mew flopped at the NAIC. It didn't do very good. Like, I think it got like top 16, which I guess is good, right? But like, it's not like a super amazing finish. You know, Spiritombs are all over the place, especially with just the massive success that Arceus had at the NAIC, and like every Arceus deck is playing a Spiritomb. Mew just feels kind of bad, and that kind of extends to Lugia by proxy because they don't like Spiritomb either. Duraludon also did really well this weekend, which is kind of something that I don't think a lot of people were expecting personally. So I feel like people might be a little turned off of Lugia. So I do genuinely think that Inteleon Urshifu probably still fits a pretty good niche for the World Championships. I probably would look into ways to innovate the list. I've been thinking a lot about potentially including a Vaporeon VMAX in the list as like a 1-1. Just to kind of give you that heavy hitter and it kind of synergizes with the Inteleon, right? Because you're going to be putting damage counters on things with Double Gunner anyway. The Vaporeon could kind of come in there. I don't know. It's something that needs to be workshopped. I think that the Inteleon or Shifu deck kind of needs to see some innovation to truly be successful at Worlds. But what that looks like, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. And as a little bit of a bonus, since I'm not going to Worlds, I am going to get started on my Obsidian Flames testing here pretty soon. So just as a bonus, here are my top picks for the Obsidian Flames format as well. Just disclaimer, at the time of recording, and probably at the time you're watching this, we're not going to have... We don't have the full set list for Ruler of the Black Flame or Obsidian Flames yet, so we don't know everything that's coming in the set. There could be more viable cards, but based off of what's been revealed so far, this looks like a filler set, to be honest. I think it's definitely going to be Paldea Evolved format, but with Dark Charizard EX. And that's about it. So, my early impressions of the format, I want to keep playing Inteleon or Shifu. Again, I just think it's one of the best decks in the Paldea Evolved format, and if Obsidian Flames' only change is to bring Dark Charizard and Tyranitar into the mix, then I feel like Inteleon or Shifu just stays as one of the best decks in the format, because Inteleon or Shifu can punish Dark Charizard and Lightning Tyranitar the same way that they punish Gardevoir, the same way that they punish Lost Zone Box. I just don't feel like those decks have many solid game plans, if any at all, to deal with this deck. So I definitely feel like Inteleon or Shifu is still very strong for the Obsidian Flames format. But speaking of Dark Charizard EX, I do want to test it out. It is an absurdly powerful card, an ability that accelerates energy to anywhere on your board, an attack that only gets more powerful the further behind you get in prize cards. It's an absurdly strong-looking deck as far as the stats go, and I'd be pretty interested to try it out, because I do think it's going to be really good. And whenever a new format comes around, I also like to test a off-the-wall archetype that I feel like might be strong, which is why we have Superior V-Star here. I love Superior V-Star. That is the very first thing I tested when Silver Tempest came out. It unfortunately hasn't been very good, and I think if you're going to play Superior in the Obsidian Flames format, it probably has to be alongside Arceus, so you can make a toolbox out of it. That way you can kind of shore up some other matchups like Gardevoir and stuff like that. But the reason I'm kind of wanting to test Superior is that if you look at the Dark Charizard EX, it is actually weak to Grass. So that kind of opens up an avenue for Grass Pokemon to have a small niche in the format, which I think could be really good. Of course, the Dark Charizard is probably going to be paired alongside other Fire-type Pokemon, so, you know, just slapping in a Grass-type Pokemon is obviously not going to be the greatest solution to dealing with Dark Charizard, but it's a place to start at the very least, and I think could make for some very interesting Arceus Toolbox-type decks to kind of get around the metagame, using Superior as kind of your Charizard answer. Could be interesting. We'll have to test. I'm not confident of it, to be perfectly honest, but like I said, I like to give an oddball archetype some kind of attention in the spotlight whenever a new format is coming around. So my goals for the next season, I actually don't really have much in the way of goals for next season. I actually got a lot of personal stuff going on in my life right now, like things I want to improve on in my personal and professional life. Regionals and stuff like that, it's going to take a bit of a backseat until I can get all of that ironed out, and I do expect that to take a few months, unfortunately. So I'm keeping my goals for this season pretty low-key. Just want to try to win a League Cup, because even though, I'm not going to be attending regionals as much, League Cups, League Challenges, stuff like that are still going to be fairly realizable for me to get to. So I'd like to win a League Cup this season. I'd like to get my first day 2 and make some kind of an appearance on stream, either to play on stream or to get interviewed on stream, get pulled aside by the casters mid-round or something like that. Definitely some goals I have for this season. Nothing too crazy, I don't think, considering that I may not be as active as I'd like to be for regionals at the beginning of the season. But it is what it is, just kind of some things that I want to do for this season. But that's going to cover it for my season review. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed kind of hearing some of my stories and my thought processes. This season definitely was a little weird. I think it started off okay, and like we had a really bad dip there in the Silver Tempest format. Things didn't really go our way, but ended up, I think, turning it back around with some solid finishes at Milwaukee and NAIC. It was really cool to just like take the entire season and be like, all right, starting with Baltimore, going all the way through the NAIC, what can I go to? And try to metagame and try to become better as a player. And I do genuinely think that I became a better player throughout this entire process. Like, I'm definitely a stronger player than I was a year ago when I started this season in Baltimore, and certainly a stronger player than I was about a year and a half ago when I started competitive Pokemon in Indianapolis last year. So overall, I think this season was a success, even though I kind of missed, I missed the World's Invite, I missed the Day 2s, all that kind of stuff. I do think that this season was still a success. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, don't forget to check out the Damage Counter podcast on all major podcasting platforms. We're available on Spotify, Audible, Amazon, Apple, Google, you name it, we're there. And if we're not, let me know in the comments below and I'll make sure our podcast gets there. You can follow my Twitter. You can follow my co-host Josh's Twitter. Check those at the top, at EmmerDCP, at Smiling_Anarchy. And you can follow the podcast itself on Twitter at Damage Counter. Definitely check us out and stay tuned for more videos. We've got some tabletop gameplay scheduled. We're going to get some of that out to you, and hope you're looking forward to that. So maybe hit the subscribe button if if that sounds interesting, and if you're looking forward to more content as the next season unfolds. With that being said, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.